He thought he bought her to save his ranch, but she was the one who came to bury the past. The auction bell rang sharp through the dry air of Hollow Creek, the kind of sound that made animals stir and men go silent. Silas Crane wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of a weathered hand. His ranch was dying. His bones ached like the fences on his land, cracked and tired. He hadn't come to buy a laborer. Hell, he could barely feed himself. But something, a force, maybe guilt, kept him near that wagon of souls being sold, like sacks of flour. Then he saw her, a woman, maybe 30, skin burnt from years in the fields, hands rougher than his own. But her eyes? Her eyes didn't belong to no auction. They belonged to someone who had survived something horrible. $1, the auctioneer barked. The men laughed. She too old to pick cotton, barely fit to sweep a floor. Silas stepped forward. $1, he said, voice dry. The crowd chuckled again. What you gonna do with her, Crane? Raise ghosts with her? No, he said flatly. Let her raise mine. The woman didn't smile, didn't nod. She climbed into his wagon like she'd done it 1,000 times, like she knew where they were going. Silas didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. That night, she slept in the barn, curled up in hay like it was silk. Silas left her, some bread, and didn't look back, but something pulled him back anyway. Her sackcloth bundle had fallen open. Inside wasn't much: a cracked hairbrush, a torn photo of a young boy, and a note. It read, "If he finds me here, it ends. I won't." Run this time. Silas's heart skipped. Who was he? And why did he feel like this woman hadn't come to be saved, but to start a war? If you're someone who believes every soul carries a story, then this one might just haunt you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear ain't just a tale. It's a warning written in dust, silence, and blood. The morning air was cold, even in late summer. Silas stepped out with a tin cup of coffee, his boots crunching the dry dirt underfoot. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open, sunlight cutting through like a blade. She was already awake, not just awake, working. Her hands were wrapped in strips of old cloth, and yet she was lifting hay bales like she didn't feel pain. She didn't speak, just worked. Silas cleared his throat. "You don't have to start yet. I ain't even told you what needs doing." The woman paused, then spoke her first words since the auction. "I know what a dying ranch looks like." Her voice was flat, but not cold, like someone who'd stopped wasting time on small things, like hope. Silas stared at her, trying to piece her together. The photo of the boy, the note, the silence. "What's your name?" he asked finally. She didn't look up. "Call me what you want. I won't be here long." That hit harder than it should have. He nodded, more to himself than her. "Well, if you're gonna leave, least finish mending that fence first. Coyote's been sneaking in." She nodded once, but her hands didn't stop moving. Later that afternoon, Silas walked past the barn again, expecting to see her resting. But she wasn't. Instead, she was behind the barn, digging a small hole, with her bare hands. "Hey!" he shouted. "What in God's name are you doing?" She stood up slowly, covered in dust. "Just needed to bury something." He looked at her hands, shaking. "You burying a memory or a body?" She looked him dead in the eyes. Sometimes they're the same. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls. And outside, somewhere in the darkness, a strange figure, on horseback, paused at the edge of the ranch, watching the barn, breathing slow, waiting. The next morning, Silas found boot prints by the fence line. Deep ones. Fresh. Someone had been watching the ranch. He scanned the horizon but saw nothing, just dry hills, swaying grass, and an old scarecrow hanging by one arm. Back inside, he poured a cup of coffee. The woman, still unnamed, was already on the porch, sharpening a dull axe with a piece of stone. She looked up, not startled, just aware. "You see anything strange last night?" Silas asked. She paused. He's getting closer. Silas froze. He? Who? She didn't answer. She never did when it mattered most, but her hands trembled slightly. That was new. Silas leaned against the post, eyes narrowed. You got someone. Following you? The woman's jaw tightened. Not someone. Something worse. He doesn't wear a badge, but he carries law with him. His own kind of law. Silas didn't know what that meant, but it made his skin crawl. That afternoon, he tried to distract himself with chores, fixing the water trough, chopping firewood, but his eyes kept drifting back to the woman. She didn't just work. She moved like she was hiding something beneath her skin. Every swing of the axe was too precise, every glance over her shoulder too practiced. He'd known men who survived war. They carried that same haunted silence. That evening, he brought her a plate of beans and cornbread. You ever gonna tell me why you were really on that auction block? She didn't look at the food, just stared at the horizon. Because I had to disappear. Silas sat down next to her on the porch, both of them watching the sun melt behind. The hills. After a long pause, she whispered, You ever heard of a man called Maddox Kane? Silas flinched. The name was like thunder, rare but unforgettable. Maddox Kane, he said. The butcher of Dry Hill? The bounty hunter who never brings men in alive? She nodded slowly. He's the one I'm running from. Silas's mouth went dry. You did something? She finally looked at him. No. I saw something. That night, Silas loaded his rifle for the first time in months, because if Maddox Kane was coming, they weren't just hiding a secret anymore. They were waiting for death. The rooster crowed late, as if even the animals sensed danger. Silas woke up to banging on the side of his house. He rushed outside, rifle in hand, ready to shoot, but there was no man. Just a dead coyote nailed to the fence post. Its throat had been slit clean, and something had been carved into its side with a knife. Just one word. Return. Silas looked. Around. No rider, no dust trail, no sound. The woman stood behind him now. He didn't hear her come. She stared at the word for a long time. He knows I'm here. Silas's hand clenched the rifle tighter. You tell me everything. Now, she nodded slowly and walked to the barn. He followed. There, she unwrapped a bundle from her sack. Inside was a sheriff's badge, broken in two, and a blood-soaked journal. Silas recognized the name etched in faded ink. Sheriff Elijah Crane, his older brother, killed in a crossfire years ago. But Silas never knew how. The woman said softly, He wasn't killed in a shootout. He was executed. I saw it. Maddox Kane made me watch. Silas's heart stopped. Why you? He asked. She didn't blink. Because your brother died protecting me, and I've been running ever since. Outside, the wind picked up. In the distance, a single figure on horseback stood still on the ridge, just watching. The barn smelled like hay and blood. Silas sat on a barrel, holding the broken sheriff's badge like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Dust filtered through the cracks in the wood, casting long shadows across the dirt floor. His brother had died protecting this woman, this stranger, and she'd carried that secret like a ghost on her back for who knows how long. What was his last word? Silas asked without looking up. She hesitated. Your name. The silence between them stretched like a taut rope. Silas stood, jaw tight. You should have told me sooner. She didn't flinch. Would you have believed me? He wanted to say yes, but the truth hung heavy between them. Finally, she added, Your brother wasn't supposed to die. Maddox wanted me to kill him myself. Said it was part of the debt. Silas turned slowly. Debt? She looked away. There was a time when I worked for men like him. Not because I wanted to. Because I had to. Chains? He asked. No. Worse. Choice. Outside, a crow cawed in the distance. The sun had barely risen, but the ranch already felt haunted. Silas walked out, boots kicking up dust. He stared at the ridge. The rider was gone. But in its place, smoke. Thin, black smoke curling into the sky from the east pasture. He ran. When he reached the field, he found the old storage shed in flames, his late father's tools, harnesses, and spare lumber reduced to ash. Something else lay burning in the middle, something that made his blood freeze. A cow skull, blackened and charred, had been nailed to the shed's front post, and inside its hollow eyes, a folded piece of parchment. Silas pulled it out, his hands shaking. On the paper was a crude sketch. Him. The woman. And a bullet between them. No signature, no message, just a warning. He stomped out the last of the fire, coughing, eyes watering from smoke and fear. When he returned to the house, the woman was waiting on the porch. "He's marking territory now," she said. "Means he's close." Silas nodded grimly. "Then we stop running. You've been hiding long enough." She gave him a look, half gratitude, half guilt. "If we stand, we might die." Silas loaded his rifle. "Then we die on our own damn land." That night, as the moon rose, the wind carried more than dust. It carried footsteps, measured, slow. And a shadow crossed the field, pausing just outside the gate. A man in black, hat low, gun at his hip. Maddox Kane had arrived. Maddox Kane didn't knock. He stood under the arch of the gate like a ghost that never needed permission. In the pale moonlight, his face looked carved from stone, scar running from temple to chin, as if God himself had tried to erase him, and failed. The woman froze, her eyes locked onto him like prey recognizing the hunter after years of false safety. "He shouldn't be here yet," she whispered. Silas stepped forward. "This your demon?" "No," she gritted her teeth. "He's worse. He's my debt." Maddox took one slow step forward, then another. He stopped just before the porch, tipped his hat to Silas, and said in a voice like wind over gravel, "This here ain't about you, rancher. Hand her over and you can go back to your corn and cattle." Silas cocked his rifle. "No deal." Maddox's grin was pure venom. "Didn't think so." Then his eyes slid to the woman. "You look well, Ruth." Silas flinched. "Your name's Ruth?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped down off the porch and faced Maddox. "I'm not who I was, and you're not untouchable anymore." He chuckled low. "Girl, I taught you how to hold a knife. You think this farm boy's gonna save you now?" Before Silas could speak, Maddox added, "He ever tell you about that brother of his?" "What really happened in Carson Gulch?" Silas narrowed his eyes. Maddox looked amused. "Oh, she didn't tell you the deal. He wasn't just protecting her. He was buying her freedom." The air went still. "What?" Silas whispered. Ruth's voice cracked. "Your brother made a bargain. He traded his life for mine. He knew Maddox would kill him. But he stayed anyway." Maddox's voice dropped cold. "And now the balance tips back. That favor's past due." Suddenly, a crack rang out, a warning shot, from the barn. Both Silas and Maddox turned sharply. Someone else was here, and they weren't waiting for introductions. Ruth grabbed Silas's hand. "We need to get to the creek now." Silas hesitated, but when Maddox reached for his revolver, he didn't wait. The chase had begun, and this time, it wasn't just about the past, it was about survival. Silas didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, eyes on the horizon. Maddox hadn't attacked, but he hadn't left either, just vanished into the hills like a vulture waiting for meat to rot. Inside the house, the woman sat by the dying fire, staring into it like it whispered secrets only she could hear. "You owe me the truth," Silas said, finally walking in. "All of it." She didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her worn satchel and pulled out a small bundle, wrapped in yellowed newspaper and tied with fraying twine. Inside was a faded photograph. 4 people, 2 men, a woman, and a little girl holding a wooden doll. That's Elkhorn 15 years ago, she whispered, before Maddox turned it to ashes. Who are they? My family. And the girl? She hesitated. Me. Silas looked closer. The woman beside the girl wore a brooch, a silver horse head with emerald eyes. I've seen this, he said. At the pawn shop in Baxter, her voice cracked. It was the last thing I sold before I was bought. By Maddox? No, she said, staring into the fire. By my husband, for 5 bullets and a horse. Outside, the coyotes howled. And for the first time, Silas didn't know who to hate more. Maddox Kane, or the world that made her choose survival over soul. Silas held the photograph in his hand, fingers brushing over the edges like they were touching ghosts. That your daughter? He asked softly, pointing at the little girl with the wooden doll. She nodded, her throat tightening. Her name was Clara. Was. Silas heard the past tense like a thunderclap. I did things to protect her, Silas. Things no woman should be forced to do. Maddox offered food when there was famine, medicine when the fever came, and protection from the men who'd already taken too much. You made a deal with the devil. She looked up, her eyes burning. I was the devil. For a while. The candle beside them flickered in the cold night air. He used me, trained me, not just to survive, but to destroy. I ran packages, messages, and when needed, I removed obstacles. Ranchers, lawmen, townsfolk who asked too many questions. But the day he asked me to kill a child, someone else's daughter, you broke. She nodded slowly. I turned on him, stole his ledger, fled Elkhorn, and hid. I was supposed to meet my family in a safe house 3 towns over. What happened? Maddox got there first. The silence cracked like a whip in the air. Silas clenched his jaw. And now he wants to finish what he started. She looked up, tears shining but unfallen. No, now he wants me to finish what I started. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the barn outside. Horses neighed in panic. Silas grabbed his rifle and bolted toward the door. But before he could open it, a bullet whistled through the window, grazing the edge of the table and embedding in the far wall. He's not waiting anymore, Silas muttered. And from the darkness outside, Maddox's voice rang cold and clear. Tick-tock, girl, you've got till sunup. Either you come out, or I burn everything you care about, again. The silence after her last sentence was louder than any gunshot. I said no, she whispered, barely audible. That night I took Clara and we ran. Through the blizzard, through the hills. I held her so tight. But Frost doesn't care who you love. Her voice broke, and Silas could feel his breath catch in his throat. She died in my arms, Silas, just outside a burned-down church in Clearwater. I buried her there, with that same wooden doll she loved. She pulled out the tiny, charred doll from her bag, its edges blackened, one eye missing, but still intact. Silas stared at it like it was holy. That's why I went to the auction, she continued. Not because I wanted to escape, but because I had nowhere left to hide. Silas finally sat down beside her, the weight of everything pressing down like a storm. I ain't no saint either, he said quietly. I know what it feels like to lose blood in the snow. Maybe we're both ghosts, just looking for land we can haunt in peace. She looked up at him. Do you believe in redemption, Silas? I believe in second chances, and guns loaded with reasons, she almost smiled, but outside the sound of a distant horse echoed in the darkness. Then a voice. Dawn's coming, and I'm taking back what's mine. Maddox. The wooden doll lay between them on the wooden table, half burnt, weather-worn, yet strangely whole. The woman's fingers trembled as she held it like a relic. She was only 8, she whispered. Her feet were frozen when we made it to the chapel ruins. I wrapped her in my coat, prayed through the night. But Clara, she stopped breathing before dawn. Silas clenched his jaw. He'd heard war stories. He'd seen men break. But this was something crueler than war. It was survival laced with guilt. I buried her with my bare hands, she continued, her voice cracking like old wood. The snow was too deep to dig far, so I covered her in stone, prayed with her doll in my hand, and walked away like a coward. Silas stood up, pacing the room. You think you're a coward? You did what you had to. No, Silas. I became someone else after that. Someone darker. And then her tone changed. Colder. I went back. He turned, surprised. To Maddox? She nodded. I told him Clara died in a storm. He believed me, but I didn't go back to serve him. I went back to end him. Slowly. Silas narrowed his eyes. What did you do? I became his most trusted hand. For 2 years, I worked my way into his inner circle, until I found the ledgers, the proof, the list of names of girls sold, families wiped out, bribes paid to lawmen, everything. Silas was stunned. You kept this? She pulled a small oil-stained notebook from her satchel. Maddox thought I burned it, but I knew I'd need it, and now, so do you. Silas flipped through the pages. Dozens of names, dates, places. His own town's name was there too. Dover Ridge. You're telling me Maddox sold people from my town? Not sold, hunted. Anyone who stood up to his railroad expansion plan, gone. Accidents, disappearances, fires. Silas's face turned pale. My brother. He died in a barn fire. They said it was lightning. But the weather that day, he didn't finish. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know his name then. Silas sat down, heavy as stone. And now Maddox knows you're here. You think he'll wait? No, she said, eyes sharp. He's watching us. Tonight he'll test the fences. Tomorrow he'll burn everything. Silas looked out the window, a faint flicker of orange. In the distance, not the sun, not lightning, a torch. They were already out there. Silas didn't speak for a long while. The weight of her words felt heavier than the rifle slung across his shoulder. He looked out through the cracked barn door, where snowflakes danced like ghosts. His breath came in long, clouded exhales. You? No, he finally said. When I was 15, my father told me, men who bury their pain become the very monsters they fear. I never understood that. Until now. She looked at him, surprised. This was the first time he'd spoken of his past. My mother died when I was 9. Fever. Took her fast. My father, he didn't cry. Didn't mourn. Just turned mean. Beat the animals, then me. Said it was the only way to stay strong. Silas chuckled bitterly. By the time I turned 18, I left and never looked back. She listened, silently, their pain now running parallel, crossing like old tracks in the snow. I swore I'd never become him. But this land, this drought, the debts, it changes you, hardens you. I used to look in the mirror and see him staring back. His hand trembled as he leaned on the post. Till the day I saw you in that auction, shackled, eyes empty, like mine used to be. That's when I knew I had a choice. Her eyes welled up, not from pity, but understanding. And what did? You choose? She asked. To break the damn cycle, Silas said, his voice firm. To do one thing right in my miserable life. Silence fell again, but it was different now. Not cold, more like 2 embers barely surviving the storm. Then she said something he didn't expect. You didn't just break the cycle. You gave me a reason to believe again. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from outside the barn. They both jumped. Silas grabbed his rifle instinctively, motioning her to stay low. From behind the barn, shadows moved, boots crunching in snow, distant. Voices shouting, "Check the stables! She's here somewhere!" Her face paled. Maddox's men. Silas's grip on the rifle tightened. "How the hell did they find you?" I left something behind at the grave. A mark. I thought it was safe." He cursed under his breath. "They tracked it. We don't have much time." Another voice rang out from the dark. "We know she's with you, rancher. Hand her over, and we won't burn your damn land to the ground." Silas's knuckles turned white. She looked at him. "I can run. Lead them away. You have a life here. Don't throw it away for me." But Silas didn't move. Instead, he turned, cocked the rifle, and said, "This is the only life worth living now." Silas sat still in the dim barn, the oil lamp casting long, flickering shadows on the dirt floor. He hadn't moved since he told her about the scar. Not the one on his leg, but the one on his soul. "The night my father died," he said, voice hoarse. "I didn't cry. Didn't feel anything. I just sat by the fire, eating stale bread, while the storm took him. He went out to tie the horses and never came back. They found him 3 days later, frozen stiff, hands still clenched around the reins, like he was trying to hold on to something long gone. The woman, still dressed in the worn cloth she had come to the ranch in, but now stronger in her presence, listened with stillness. Her fingers gently traced the rim of the chipped metal cup in her hand. Her eyes shimmered, not from tears, but from recognition. Pain knows pain. "I thought I was free then," Silas continued, staring at the wall as if a phantom from the past stood there. "No more beatings, no more silence so loud it made your chest ache. But that house, it didn't let me go. It kept whispering his words. Every mistake I made on this ranch, every crop that failed, every injured horse, I'd hear him. Again, 'You'll never be enough, Silas. You're just like your weak mother.' He laughed bitterly. I hated that man, but worse, I feared I'd become him." The woman shifted closer, the straw crunching beneath her. "But you didn't," she said softly. "You gave a stranger like me shelter, work, a voice." Silas turned to her. "You call this a voice? You were bought like cattle, treated like property. You should hate me." She held his gaze. "But I don't. Because in your silence, you still never raised a hand. In your pain, you still let me speak. That matters." A cold wind howled through the cracks of the barn. Somewhere in the night, a horse neighed, unsettled. Silence returned, heavy, but no longer empty. After a long pause, Silas whispered, "What's your name?" The woman blinked. She hadn't heard that question in years. "Jessa," she said. "Jessa May Nolan." Silas repeated it under his breath like a prayer. "Jessa." She looked down. "It was my mother's name, too. She died when I was 10. They said a woman shouldn't be raising a girl alone, so they took me. First the mill, then the trains, then the auction." Silas felt something crack inside him. The anger that had always shielded him now lay splintered beneath the weight of her truth. Jessa stood and reached for his hand. "You're not your father, Silas. And I'm not just someone who was bought. Maybe this place, maybe we're both meant to heal here." He didn't know why, but he let her touch linger. Suddenly, a loud knock rattled the barn door. Silas rose, grabbing the shotgun from the wall. Who the hell would be here this time of night? He growled. Jessa's hand tightened on her cup. "It's them," she whispered. "I know that knock. It's them." "Who?" She looked at him, pale and trembling. "The men who used to own me. They've found me." That morning, the sun peeked over the edge of the ranch like it didn't want to see what was about to unfold. Elise stood by the barn, her hair braided back, cheeks dusted with cold and resolve. The silence between her and Silas had grown heavier ever since the fight with Deputy Harlan. Though they'd both survived, something inside them had changed. Too many truths had spilled, and too many ghosts had been named. Silas hadn't spoken, more than a few words since. He spent most of his time working the fence line, or fixing things that weren't broken. But today, something was different. Inside the old barn, beneath a crooked floorboard Elise stepped on every morning, she found a box. Nothing fancy, just cedar wood with rusted hinges, and inside it, an old pair of muddy boots, clearly untouched for years, and tucked inside the left boot, a letter. The envelope was yellowed and brittle, the ink faded. But the moment she saw the handwriting, she gasped. It wasn't Silas's, it was written by a woman. To the man I once loved more than life, if you're reading this, then either you've forgiven me, or I've passed on. Either way, there are things you never knew. Elise sat down right there on the hay floor. Her hands trembled. The letter wasn't addressed to her, but every word in it burned her soul like it belonged to her anyway. It was from Anna, Silas's late wife, the woman the whole town whispered about, the one they said ran off, the one Silas never spoke of. I never meant to leave. They threatened me, Silas. The land deal, the sheriff. They said if I told you they'd hurt you, or worse, burn down the ranch. I thought disappearing was the only way to save you. But now I see, leaving destroyed you more than death ever could. Elise couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a ranch. This land was built on sacrifices and secrets, and Silas had buried every single one of them in silence. As she stepped out of the barn, clutching the letter, she saw him, standing by the lake, staring at nothing. The wind played with his coat like it wanted to take him too. She walked over slowly. No words, just the paper in her hand. He looked at her. His eyes, red but dry. I knew you'd find it one day, he said. Her heart stopped. You knew? She asked, voice cracking. He nodded. I buried the letter with the boots because I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to hate her for leaving. But now, he looked up at the horizon, eyes hard like stone. Now I just want to know who made her write it. Elise didn't hesitate. Then let's find out. The clouds rolled in like a warning. By midday, the ranch was covered in a sheet of angry gray sky, and the wind howled through the dry grass like a ghost looking for home. Elise stood by the wooden fence, her hands gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Her clothes were soaked through, and still she stood there, watching the field Silas had been tilling since dawn. He hadn't stopped. Not once. Not when the rain began. Not when the thunder cracked like an old whip. Not even when she called his name. It had been 2 days since the letter was found. The letter from Silas's late father, tucked inside an old pair of boots Elise had found while cleaning the attic. A letter no one was supposed to read. Son, if you're reading this, then I'm long gone, and you found out what I did. I never told you about the woman who worked our land when you were a boy. You thought she was just a servant, but she was much more. She saved the ranch when I almost lost it, and I betrayed her. I couldn't let her own what she'd earned. I was a coward. I hope someday you'll do better than me. I hope you'll make it right. That woman, her name was Adele Grant, and Elise was Adele's daughter. That truth hit Silas like a runaway horse. He hadn't spoken since. The man who bought Elise at the auction, thinking he was rescuing her from a cruel system, had unknowingly become the heir of the very injustice her mother endured. Elise had connected the dots the night she read the letter. The necklace her mother had given her, the initials carved on the barn's corner post, even the journal pages she had tucked away years ago. Everything pointed back to this ranch, this land. Her mother had bled for it and been erased from its history. Silas had inherited the sins of a father he didn't even respect, and Elise had inherited a wound she hadn't even known she carried. Now here they were, 2 people, 1 legacy, broken by truths they didn't ask for. She walked into the rain, slowly, feet heavy with every step. Silas. Her voice cracked, barely louder than the wind. You read it, didn't you? He kept digging. The soil churned in wet clumps, as he plowed with fury as if the ground could swallow the past. "I didn't know, Elise," he finally said, his voice low and broken. "I didn't know what he did to her." Elise stepped closer, heart pounding. "But now you do." Silas looked up. His eyes, usually calm and storm gray, were bloodshot and hollow. "I can't undo it. I can't give your mother back her years, her dignity, her name." "No," Elise whispered. "But you can stop pretending you owe me nothing." Silas dropped the plow handle. The sound echoed louder than thunder. "I don't owe you nothing," he muttered. "I owe you everything." They stood there, rain crashing between them like a curtain of memory and guilt. "I didn't fall in love with you because I pitied you, Elise," Silas said, taking a step forward. "I fell in love with you because you fought like hell. And because you never asked for a thing. You worked harder than anyone, including me. I love this land because it felt like it was mine too," Elise replied. "And now I know why." There was silence. Then Elise took off her necklace, the one her mother had given her. She placed it in Silas's hand. "Then make it right," she said. "Give back what was stolen, not just the land, the name, the truth." Silas stared at the necklace. He looked at her, tears mixing with rain. "Come inside," he said finally, "before the storm takes you too." She shook her head. "Not until you decide if you're the man your father feared, or the man he wished he could have been." And with that, she turned and walked toward the house. Silas stood there for a long time, alone in the storm, but something inside him had shifted. The soil wasn't the only thing being turned over today. The truth had roots, and they were finally being unearthed. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was even louder. Silas sat on the porch steps, his shirt clinging to his skin, mud dried into his boots, his hat tossed aside. Elise stood a few feet away, her fingers gently clasping the letter she had found, the one that had shaken the very roots of their lives. "You weren't meant to find that letter," Silas murmured, eyes on the dirt path leading to the barn. "I wasn't meant to stay," Elise replied softly. "But I did, and I still am." She walked toward him, each step echoing with all the unsaid words that had built between them like invisible walls. She handed him the letter. He didn't read it. He already knew what it said. His father had written about the debt, about how he had sold Elise's contract in a desperate deal with the auction brokers, how he knew what it would do to Silas, how he had begged forgiveness from a grave he would never rise from. Silas's voice broke. "All this time, I thought I saved you, but it was me who was bound." Elise knelt down beside him, taking his rough hands in hers. "You did save me, not just from the auction, but from a life where I thought I was nothing more than what I could carry or cook. You saw me, Silas." Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, and for the first time, Silas let his fall too. The next morning, they buried the letter beneath the biggest oak tree on the ranch, not to hide it, but to lay it to rest. What came after was slow but honest. Elise began to manage the ranch accounts. Turns out her late husband had taught her numbers well. He just never let her use them. She brought order to chaos, strength to weakness. Her hands, once used only for labor, now signed supply orders, hired new help, and started a side trade in organic dairy that turned the ranch profitable for the first time in years. Silas, once broken by a father's shame and his own pride, found peace in her presence. He stopped drinking. He smiled more. He even started singing while feeding the horses. Badly, of course, but Elise loved it anyway. 1 year later. The town's harvest festival returned. Same auction stage, same dust, same eyes watching. But this time, Elise stood on stage by choice. Not as an item for sale, but as the guest of honor. The mayor called her a symbol of transformation, strength, and grace. The same people who had once whispered about her age, her past, her poverty, now clapped like she was royalty. because she was. To them, to Silas, to herself. Silas watched from the front row, pride in his eyes and a gentle smile that hadn't left his face all year. As Elise stepped down, she walked toward him, held out her hand, and said loud enough for all to hear, "You didn't buy me that day, Silas. You just opened the door. I walked through it myself." And the crowd, some with tears, some with awe, stood and applauded. That night, under the same stars that once bore witness to two broken souls, they danced barefoot in the barn. No music, no guests, just them. She whispered, "You once asked what freedom looked like." He nodded, holding her close. "It looks like this," she said, smiling. "Two people who gave each other back their names." If Elise and Silas's story touched your heart, don't forget to drop it in the comments, like the video, and share it with someone who's ever been underestimated. And if you want more heart-touching stories every week, make sure to subscribe. Because here at Luminous Tales, we don't just tell stories. We share feelings that stay with you. This is Luminous Tales,